Hi, everybody. Thomas Morgan here from 1031navigator.com. Today, there's no intro music, and this is more of a serious post about Krystal in their bankruptcy that they just filed. Krystal is a hamburger chain similar to White Castle in the QSR fast food space, and they filed bankruptcy a little over a week ago. And so the purpose of this episode is to, one, discuss tenant bankruptcies, but also if you are a Krystal landlord and want to organize with other landlords who are not getting rent or who have not been getting rent since November and would like to file under, it's not necessarily a class action, but a creditor group with a bankruptcy attorney, then I'm going to post a link here in the show notes for you to fill out your information and potentially join the creditor group of other landlords who are claiming all the unpaid rent under their remaining term of their lease as creditors. And you know what? I'll just set up a link, 1031navigator.com/Krystal. Again, 1031navigator.com/Krystal. And if you're a Krystal landlord, and if you want to potentially join a creditor group or explore doing it or talk to other Krystal landlords, then just visit that link. And then also we have some resources that we could help you out with re-tenanting the property or potentially selling the property. But long story short, I've been fortunate enough to have never had a tenant directly go bankrupt or have issues similar to this. Knock on wood, in almost 20 years of doing this, I've had one client who bought a Sleepy's mattress store. Sleepy's was actually a really good privately owned mattress company, and we underwrote the deal based on their credit. And then about a year, 2 years later, they got bought by Mattress Firm, and then Mattress Firm ended up going south and taking that deal with him. And that owner had to restructure the lease under the Mattress Firm bankruptcy. But fortunately, that we didn't actually put him into a Mattress Firm deal. It was a Sleepy's deal. I guess the only other case we've had where it was that Captain D's in Denver, where the guy just gave the keys back. He didn't actually file bankruptcy, but he just said, "I'm closing shop and I want to give you the keys back." And luckily, it was a really good piece of real estate. I've covered that in other episodes. Basically, what it comes down to is on these single tenant QSR fast food deals, you really have to look closely at, one, the tenant and their financial strength, and two, the underlying real estate. In the case of the one Krystal deal I've done, it was a build to suit in, I think, 2016. Krystal had an aggressive expansion plan. They tore down another restaurant, built a brand new one. They set their rent a little above $100,000. They thought they were going to do well there. And obviously they didn't. Company was mismanaged. They weren't operating full capacity, kind of missing the consumer demand, consumer trends. But when we bought the deal, I can't disclose it here because of confidentiality requirements, but they were doing several $100 million in revenue. They were profitable. The balance sheet was decent. They had over 300 locations, 350 locations at that point. So that was, at that point, it was a really good deal. Looked like a good credit, not S&P rated credit, but a decent credit tenant who could pay their bills, and they did for 3 years or so. So fortunately, my client on this deal doesn't have any debt, and so they're in a good spot. They own a lot of other properties, and they're going to be able to mitigate their risk because of that. But also, it was and is a really good piece of real estate. It's outside a major southeastern U.S. city. It's on a road with it's actually got 7 lanes of traffic right out front, right across the street from a McDonald's. Tons of other retail around. Decent household incomes, super high traffic counts, low crime, growing population. So I think we'll be able to re-tenant the building and or sell the building to someone else. Unfortunately, like I said, my client didn't have debt on the property. They're going to be able to weather the storm because they're in a safe spot. But just with some of the LinkedIn posts I've done and some of the other forums I've posted on, we already have about 10 Krystal landlords who have contacted us. And unfortunately, some of them aren't in the as good a situation as my client. They have debt on the property. They were relying on that money to pay their bills, living off that money, et cetera. So, something just to think about when you're buying these triple net or fast food deals is if something happened to the tenant, and it's not just fast food, it could be retail, it could be office, industrial, but the strength of the tenant matters. I think one, I don't know if it was necessarily a mistake in this case, but the lease provided that Krystal would report their sales and financials every year upon the request of the landlord. And I don't think my client ever requested it. And maybe if they would have each year, then they would have seen this coming. Maybe the trend would have been there. Some leases provide that the tenant has to provide every year sales and revenue figures, and they do so automatically. But this lease in particular, it was only at the request of the landlord, and I don't think they ever got that information. We have it now, but maybe we could have seen the storm brewing because they weren't a publicly traded company. There's no publicly traded stock price, et cetera. So there really weren't too many warning signs, except maybe some franchise rejuggling, management rejuggling. And they did do some kind of debt refinancing last year, which maybe would have been a red flag also. But basically on these absolute net deals, if they're paying every single month on time and no one's ever calling you about maintenance or management or whatnot, then it's easy just to sit back and let it go on autopilot. But I think embedded in there is a couple tips about staying up on your tenant, following the tenant news. You could easily set up a Google alert for your tenant. You could set up a Google alert for the market it's in. You could make sure you're getting the tenant financials. Some clients send out an inspector to the property every few years to check on the maintenance and what they're doing under the lease, whatnot. And some owners actually get in cahoots with the store manager and call them every month or every few months and say, hey, how's it going? What's going on? How's business? Even though they're not necessarily supposed to disclose how the business is going, some of the managers will. So all said and done, I think there's a few tips in there embedded for, making sure you review the tenant credit worthiness, sales, balance sheet, whatnot, and then staying up on it. And then also making sure not to over leverage the property. But most important is making sure you buy a good piece of real estate and not overpaying for it. The nice thing with a lot of these Krystal deals, I think people that I've talked to have bought them for somewhere between $800,000 and $1.4 million. So they're not huge investments. And if people did low leverage, like 50% or no leverage, then they're going to be in an okay position to release these even at a reduced rate if they needed to, or they could potentially even sell these deals because there's other fast food tenants who are going to want these locations. A lot of them, like I said, were tear down, build to suit type deals. So they're brand new buildings. The equipment, FF&E typically stays in it. So I think people will emerge okay, but we'll have to kind of see how the bankruptcy plays out. But more so if, as long as the real estate is good and the building is good location, which we cover in a lot of other episodes, then I think that's one of the most important things. But again, if you are a Krystal landlord or want more information about what's happening, go to 1031navigator.com/Krystal. And again, that's Krystal with a K. Thanks. And if you have questions, as always, hit me up. Sorry for kind of the somber episode, but it's not fun when you see people who are needing that money. They invested $1 million, $1.3 million, and they were counting on that money. And then all of a sudden the tenant stops paying rent and jerks them around for several months, and then all of a sudden files bankruptcy. It's not really fun for anyone. So I don't wish it on anybody at all. Thanks, and we'll talk with you soon.